Hello, everyone. It's my honor to be here, coming from Wet'suwet'en territory. I'm here to talk about the Major Projects Coalition. But before I do, I want to give you a little story that we were talking about earlier today. I said I'm kind of nervous about speaking in public because at 8 years old, I left a little village called Morristown, where I grew up with my grandparents. My grandparents raised me. And so my mother came to get me and took me to Surrey, British Columbia. And that was a culture shock. Not only did I go to a city I didn't know and people I didn't know, it was full of non-Indigenous people. And I went to school, and the teacher said to me, "Can you tell me what..." I could understand English, but my first language was Wet'suwet'en. So I could understand what she wanted, and she said, "Could you get up here and read the alphabet for me?" Of course, I got up and looked at everyone in the classroom, and I was like bewildered, and wow, what do I do? And not only that was so humiliating to me, but I came from a reserve in the 1955 and 1960s. It was the time of the scoop. How do they call it? Not residential, 60s scoop. And of course, some of my grandparents had gone to residential school, and we grew up in a very impoverished community. And coming to a city and looking at what was there was really kind of shocking. So I was a little bit nervous to talk, so I thought I'd better tell you that story because to break the ice. But anyway, tabi masaikyo na sneak in, denizeyu, zakozeyu, skaizeyu. Gain Nashnabi Habayinta Onza Nit Masahino to sneak in a deal. I thank the Indigenous people of this land for being here today and to honor their great history. So before I begin to talk about the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, I think it's important to set the stage for what has come from the past. Because there are elders and leaders from the past who set this direction that we are in. And one of the elders that I grew up with was my great-grandmother. And in her teaching, she said to me, "This is your teaching. You see that blade of grass on the ground?" And in our language, I said, "Yes." She said, "Pick up that blade of grass." She said, "You look at that blade of grass." I was 4 years old. When I looked at that blade of grass, she said, "Can you see that grass breathing?" I said, I looked at the grass, I looked at it, and sure enough, I swear I saw the atoms in that blade of grass. I said, "Yeah, I see it, Grandma." So her teaching to me was this: see that blade of grass, and you see that rock, and you see that tree. Everything on this earth is alive and lives. And it's you that has to live in harmony with that blade of grass. And watch where you step, she said to me. Metaphorically speaking, of course. And as a 4-year-old, I was thinking, "Oh my God, where do I go now?" So that was our teaching about our responsibility to the environment and that we had to live in harmony with that environment. That was one of the elders. The other one was my grandfather, Thomas Gray Tate, who was a World War veteran of World War II. And people like the late James Gosnell, who was a Niska leader. He and Frank Calder, they set out to obtain their Aboriginal rights. And in 1973, they set out to do so when the Supreme Court decision on the Calder case came down. And we didn't win, but we made a great stride. We made a stride forward. Other Indigenous people like the Wet'suwet'en were up next to bat. And the Wet'suwet'en from 1980 to the Supreme Court decision in 1997 obtained what we talk about today as Aboriginal rights, rights to the land, title and rights. What came from that were lawyers in the 80s. George Asp was one of those lawyers who really was instrumental in modeling how we move forward, and being a leader in his community really set the stage for the work that the Tahltan are doing today. These leaders, the Tahltan, the Nisga'a, the Wet'suwet'en, the Haida, the Squamish, in British Columbia, we are unceded territory. We have a few treaties, Jay Treaty and the Treaty 8. But most of British Columbia hadn't been ceded by society. So the Wet'suwet'en took it upon themselves to go to court and get title for the land. They did. In 1997, they got a decision from the Supreme Court of Canada that recognized Aboriginal rights and title. And the judge said, industry, government, we recognize the title and rights of Aboriginal people. This went right across Canada. Everyone in Canada benefited from the Delgamuukw-Gisdaywa decision. And what that decision brought was only two things that we've been living on for the last, 30 years, is accommodation and consultation. And as we went forward, we realized that industry was kind of using this as a vehicle to engage with First Nations. And in our community of Morristown, we don't have an industry. We have a mill, a gas station. Our people have been oppressed for 150 years. And so we need to move out of that oppression and out of that place. And so we thought, how do we do this? Then an opportunity arose that there were 4 pipelines that natural gas pipelines that wanted to go through our territories. And the Indigenous people resisted going to Lulu Island to protect the fish. The Wet'suwet'en resisted all of the pipelines, really. And until one came about and said, with the 16 nations, we'll give you equity on this project. And that was Chevron. Chevron wanted to give Indigenous people 30% equity into that project. That meant, when we did our homework on it, that if Indigenous people, the 16 communities, invested $3 billion, we would have made $6 billion on that investment alone. So we realized that we didn't have an opportunity really to buy into major projects. So a steering committee was formed by former Senator St. Germain, Harold Calla, Nilo Edwards, myself, David Lugie, Karina Levine. So we set out as a steering committee to lobby government for our right to get a loan guarantee. With the Pacific Trails Pipeline experience, we couldn't borrow the money because the interest rate was too high, and it wouldn't have had returned any profit. So when we did our research, we realized that government had a $20 billion loan guarantee fund that was available to all Canadians in business. If you wanted to start a bank, you could go and get a 3% loan guarantee. or if you wanted to, CMHC uses that loan guarantee, and Bombardier has used that loan guarantee. So as being as clever as Indigenous people are, we decided, well, let's start lobbying government for the right to use that loan guarantee should another opportunity come by. And since then, our coalition has grown to 47 nations that have formed this coalition. That's from Saskatchewan, Alberta, Ontario, BC. So it's growing, and our thought was in the beginning, when we formed the coalition, we met with Indigenous people in Prince George, different places, and we were gathering the momentum and the education and the wishes of the people. And we learned that we couldn't move ahead with major projects unless the environment was protected along the way. The Major Projects Coalition, the members said, we can't have economics without ensuring, as you've heard through the Taltan experience, that our values in the environment need to be part of any engagement. So, stepping back a little bit, while the 4 pipelines were wanting to go through, we let one through our territory, and there was a great deal of resistance in our nation. We have had roadblocks. One of our clans within our Wet'suwet'en Nation blocked the Coastal Gas Link, and we're still not at the gate. We haven't still, although they've made a deal for $9.6 billion, the Wet'suwet'en are still struggling with the idea of a pipeline going through their territory for natural gas. And so we said, what are the lesser of the 2 evils? Is it going to be coal where China continues to pollute the atmosphere? Are we going to allow that to continue? Or are we going to only let one pipeline go through so that natural gas can replace coal? To take a look at how we can protect the atmosphere. So that's what we did. As a result of this, the Major Projects has now, as I mentioned, grown to 47 nations. And so what we need from you and from industry and government is the willingness to work with us. We want to be part of the solution. We don't want to manage poverty. We want to learn to manage wealth. And so part of our coalition is to help Indigenous people like my community who has never managed wealth, who has never had wealth. And so there's a big learning curve there. We don't have the industry, and we've been really reliant on the Indian affairs. So that's the work that the coalition is doing, is to try to be a vehicle, a facilitated vehicle to help Indigenous people firstly buy into major projects, and also to, and by buying I mean lobbying the government by helping the Indigenous people doing the feasibility studies on a major project, because we don't have the capacity, each of us, to do those things that are necessary when we're looking at big business like pipelines and so forth. And right now we have an opportunity to look at a transmission line that the Ontario Teachers Federation want to support in British Columbia. And we're going to have a discussion about that at our next coalition meeting. It's an opportunity where Indigenous people along the line can buy into that project and gain wealth. But we also need to look at other models that are sustainable. And I was very fortunate to be here this evening as I met young women over there who informed me about a very sustainable energy, nuclear energy that closes down on itself. So we're not wedded to one idea. what is sustainable out there, and that's what we're looking for to support as Indigenous people. So while all this work was going on, I realized that our people had been living under the Indian Act so long in our villages. We have 6 villages in northwest British Columbia, and we operate under 2 systems of governance, under the Indian Act and under the hereditary system. And because our hereditary chiefs went to court under the Delgamuukw decision, our hereditary chiefs became aware of their authority and jurisdiction and their rights and responsibilities. And the Indian Act and the hereditary systems clash because one, the government always goes to the ban office for anything, and secondly, our hereditaries have their role as leaders in the community, in the environment, So we have to bring those things together in the community, and it's incumbent on government to support initiatives where we as Indigenous people can develop mechanisms to work to decolonize our people who have been oppressed for 150 years. That's the first step. While everything is going fast and furious ahead of us, we want to make sure that the people come along and are able to prosper from what you heard today from the Tahltan experience. That is amazing to me, that you can go from 0 to 100 in how many years? So really, that's amazing. But that's what I wanted to share with you today. And the Major Projects Coalition is work that we'll continue to do. If you have an opportunity to lobby government, is realize that we don't have the loan guarantee for Indigenous people. They won't give it to us. Government won't let us go. They won't let us do our own thing. And when the people came together, the coalition members, those are our resources. And we want to share of those resources. And I remember one elder saying to me, long gone now, he said, when the white man first came here, and they were taking our trees, and we said, we want 1 cent a tree. When you cut that log, we want 1 cent. When you take it to the mill and you sell it, we want 1 cent from what you sell. We never did get that. And the Nisga'a experience, they went to court on all they said, we want a share of the resources. If you ever get a chance to look at the National Film Board, where they filmed the first Senate committee on Aboriginal rights when they were talking about entrenching our rights and what did the Nisga'a want. The senators and the politicians in that room couldn't wrap their heads around, well, what do they want? They want a separate system, or what is it? And it was really quite plain when late James Gosnell said, we own this land, lock, stock, and barrel. And all we want is a part of the resources that you take from our lands. And we've come full circle. Today, 2014, the people are part of the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, want a part of those resources for the Indigenous people that own them. And so together, we are stronger. Together, we can make that difference. Together, we can change the footprint and make good memories for future generations. And that's why the coalition members feel that it's time for those changes to happen. And I hope that you, through your efforts, through your contacts, through your influences, will be able to give us a hand up, because we can't do it alone. You are in the same boat as we are, and we need to row that boat together, because it's our future generation that's really at the heart of everything that we do. And I thank you for that. Thank you.